Assalamu alaikum students. The topic we are going to discuss today is pollination, emasculation and roging. Pollination is the natural phenomena. It is the transfer of pollen grains from one flower or to the another flower or within the same flower. Emasculation is the artificial pollination process in which we remove the male parts from one flower and shed those pollen grains onto the another flower. And roging is the removal of unwanted plants from the field. Before understanding the concept of pollination, everyone must know the basic morphology or structure of a flower. The main parts of the flower are shown in the given picture. As we can see here, the basal part or the lowermost part of a flower is pedicel. Pedicel is the stem through which a flower is attached to the plant. And then we have the receptacle. Receptacle is the basal portion of the ovary, and then we have sepals. Sepals are leaf-like projections that function is to give support to the flower. Then we have petals. Petals are different than the sepals and the other parts of the flower. Petals are the most attractive part of the flower. Petals are mostly colored and varies in shapes and types. Different kind of flowers have different types of petals, having different colors and different shapes, etc. And then the two main important parts of the flower are the male part, that is known as stamen, and the female part, that is known as pistil. If we talk about the male part of a flower, that is stamen, stamen consists of anther and a filament. Anther is the upper portion of the male part. It contains many pollen grains on it. The anther is attached with the help of thread-like projection known as filament. Next, if we talk about the female part of the flower, it is known as pistil. It consists of stigma, style and ovary. Stigma is the upper portion of the female part on which pollen grains attach. Pollens from the anther fall on the stigma of the female part and move in the downward position through the pollen tube, through the style, and then accumulates in the ovary, where they get fused with the ovules and fertilization take place. After fertilization, these ovules are converted into zygote, and zygote matures into the seed. That's how seed production take place. So we can say that flowers are the main reproductive part of the plant, and pollination is the main basic first step of the reproduction process. Next, we talk about the pollination process. Why pollination take place? Why pollination is important? Pollination is the natural phenomena. It happens in each and every kind of flower and in every plant. It is the main basic first step of the reproduction process. It is the act of transferring pollen grains from the male part anther of a flower to the female part stigma of the flower. As you can see here in the picture given below, the whole pollination process is demonstrated here. The pollen grains from the anther are carried with the help of wind or a pollinator agents like insects, animals or any other agent. It can be human beings. They are carried with the they are carried away with the help of pollinator agents and shed onto the stigma of another flower, or it can also fall on the stigma of the same flower. If it falls on the stigma of the same flower, we call it self-pollination. Or if it will fall on the stigma of another flower, we say it cross-pollination. It can happen within the same plant or within a different plant. After fallen of pollen grains, these pollen grains move down towards the pollen tube and finally into the ovary where they get fertilized with the ovules and form the zygote. And zygote matures into the seeds. That's how reproduction or seed production take place in vegetables, in flowers, in every kind of plants. In the picture given below, self-pollination is demonstrated here. Self-pollination is the process of falling of pollen grains within the same flower. As you can see here, sorry, as you can see here, one flower is shown here. Pollen grains from the anther of the male part fall onto the stigma of female part of the same flower. As you can see here, the pollination of a flower by pollen from the same flower or from another flower on the same plant. If two flowers are present on the same plant and pollen grains from one flower falls onto the stigma of the another flower within the same plant, we will call it as a self-pollination. Let's talk about cross-pollination. As we have seen that self-pollination is the falling of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. Likewise, cross-pollination is the falling of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of another flower of a different plant or another plant. Like it is shown in the picture, the pollens attached onto the anthers are carried away with the help of wind or some pollinator agents like bees, wasps, or any other insects. It can be human beings carried away and will fall onto the stigma of another flower of a different plant, and then it will get down and the remaining reproduction process starts and it get fertilized with the ovules, and it forms zygotes, and zygotes will mature into the seeds. Next, here we can discuss the agents of pollination. Agents means those factors, those things which are responsible for transferring of pollen grains, or which are responsible for the process of pollination. The main agents of pollination are abiotic agents and biotic agents. Abiotic agents means non-living agents, and biotic agents are the living agents. If we talk about the living agents are mainly animals. Animals includes mammals, reptiles, birds, and insects. It includes any kind of living thing. uh, Due to their movements around these flowers will result into the transferring of pollen grains. And if we talk about the abiotic agents are wind and water. With the movement of wind, high velocity winds can carry pollen grains from one flower to another flower, and water. Mostly in water plants, water pollination takes place. Water plants like lily and many other water is the main agent for pollination. Next is artificial pollination. Artificial pollination is the dusting of pollen grains collected by human beings, and we dust those collected pollen grains to the stigma of another plant. It is opposite to the natural process. In the natural process, there is no role of human beings. Nothing is done by human beings. The whole process is natural. But in artificial pollination, what we do is we remove the anthers or male parts of a same flower, and we collect those pollen grains from another flower and dust onto the our tagged flower from which we previously removed the male part, and we shed those pollen grains onto the stigma or female part of the flower. So let's read what's written here. Artificial pollination is the dusting, often by hand, of fertile stigmas with the pollen from plants with desired characters. Mostly we go towards the artificial pollination when we want that our next progeny or our next generation will have our desired characteristics. Pollen from the male stamens are collected and dusted onto the stigmas of the another flower, and these flowers are tagged that these are artificially pollinated flower, or we can tag in any other way like we want. Plants with the most desirable characteristics are selected for breeding in this way. Mostly this is done for the hybridization process and in the breeding processes. Both techniques are very advantageous, like they give us our desired results. They give the results that we desire, that we want, and these results are rapid and widespread change with the populations of organisms. The main step in the artificial pollination is emasculation. Emasculation is the removal of anthers from the flowers. A bisexual flower is that flower which contains both sexes, like a perfect flower. A perfect flower is the flower which contains male as well as the female part. What we do in emasculation is we remove the anthers or male part of a flower, and only a female part, female reproductive part, pistil is remained in that flower, and we tagged that flower as emasculated flower. Emasculation is mostly performed by the plant breeders to obtain the desired variety of a plant by crossing a particular plant with the desired pollen grain. As you can see here in the picture, this is a female plant and this is a male plant, male parent plant, or we can say a male parent flower or female parent flower. Like it is shown in the figure that this flower contains, this portion is the stigma, female part, and the others are the anthers where scissor is seen. What we do is we emasculate this female plant, female parent flower with the help of scissor or forceps. We will remove the anthers and only stigma is left. And then we will select a male parent flower from which we will cut those anthers or collect the pollens with the help of a brush or forceps or with any other thing, and we will dust these pollen grains onto the female parent plant. This will be the transfer of pollen grains, pollination. We will dust these pollen grains onto the female parent flower, and this whole process is artificial pollination, and the removal of anther is emasculation. The next is rogging. Rogging is the basic main concept, like if we grow a field of plants with our desired progenies, like if we go towards the emasculation and whole field is of those plants which are artificially pollinated, and if we see that any undesirable plant or a plant in which self pollination take place or natural pollination take place, we will remove that plant because that plant will be undesirable. Or we can categorize this as in any in the light of any factors, like any, if any plant have any undesirable characteristic that we don't want to grow in our field, we will remove that plant, and this will known as rogging. If we grow a field of wheat and there is and if we see that seeds are mixed with the seeds of any other crop, like if we have some seeds of mustard in along with wheat, and if we grow a field, we will see that after germination many mustard plants are emerging and or germinating or growing in our field. Then we will, what we do, we want a wheat field, not a mustard field, we will remove those mustard field. If we talk about vegetables, we want to grow a field of radish, or we want to uh, grow a field of spinach, and we have a packet of seeds or collection of seeds. if we grow if we grow seeds in the field, we will see after germinating some off type plants, like other than mustard plants are growing in our field. What we will do, we will remove those off type plants, and we will kept only those plants which are our desired plants. This process is known as rogging. Rogging can happen from germination till harvesting. Like undesirable weeds and any kind of undesirable plant, any diseased plant will be removed. This whole process will come under the term of rogging. It refers to the act of identifying and removing plants with undesirable characteristics from agricultural field. Rogues are removed from the field to preserve the quality of the crop being grown. Here are some agronomic principles upon which we do the rogging. Rogging is the removing of unwanted plants, off-type plants. It can be diseased or damaged plants. Like if we see that some seeds produced defected plants or those have deformed structure, we will remove those plants, and this will known as rogging. We will, if we want to maintain the genetic and physical purity of the variety, we go towards the rogging. It it can be done from the seedling stage to the harvesting time. Must be through to meet certification standards. 0.5% of types for certified seeds. Adequate and timely rogging is extremely important in seed production. If we want uh, if we want genetically pure and physically pure seeds, then rogging is the most important thing. Rogging in most of the field crops may be done at many of the following stages as per needs of the seed crop: vegetative, flowering stage, and maturity stage. So students, this was the end of today's lecture. Take care. We'll see you in the next lecture. Allah Hafiz.